Greetings and salutations. This is Abdelhadi with The Bitter Truth, where we may not have all the answers, but we're going to ask an awful lot of questions. You can also support the show at patreon.com/The Bitter Truth, where you can become a bitter pill or a spoonful of sugar. And we have some more tiers coming out in the next little bit, but the spoonful of sugar is brand new, and you can visit the website for details. And today I'm very excited. We got a friend of the show coming back, which is always a good sign because it means I wasn't, mean and nasty the last time. Dr. Kate Balestrieri. She is the co-founder of the Triune Therapy Group in Beverly Hills, California. She is also an author, and she's a co-host on a show called Behind Closed Doors that is on KABC Talk Radio out of the Los Angeles area, but syndicates nationally online and on the network. Dr. Kate, are you there?
Hi, Abe. I'm here. Thank you so much for that glowing introduction.
Well, you glow, so how else could I? There's no way to diminish your light, Dr. Kate. That's just the way that goes. But no, I'm really stoked that you're able to come on. I know we were kind of going back and forth with some emails over the last week or so, and I was really intrigued by not necessarily a finding, but just your observation of how the LGBTQ community has been sort of co-opted by advertising and sort of like by corporate America, not too dissimilar from rap in the 80s or, most of the minority cultures in our country. So, you had some really cool insight in a couple of those emails. If you wanted to kind of, lead with that, we can just get started.
Sure. Well, thank you. Again, it's great to be back on your show, Abe. I love the work that you do and the questions that you ask. I think they're important questions. So in thinking about, you mentioned that I'm writing a book, and I am, and one of the main tenets of the book is understanding the role in which people objectify others, right? And this can come out in lots of different ways, and we're seeing the LGBTQ community. Some people are really in favor of the way that retailers and the culture at large really are coming to support the cause and really working towards destigmatization of what's been a really marginalized group. And there are also people within and outside of the group who are feeling like it's become an opportunistic and capitalistic endeavor, and it really doesn't maintain the same heart that true advocacy and support really conveys. So it's an interesting debate, I think, within the culture, and I think there are lots of different ways to argue both sides of it. What are your thoughts?
Well, when I read the one article that you sent me, it kind of reminded me of the last couple of years of Martin Luther King's life, where he, everything was great and hunky-dory when he was just talking about civil rights, but as soon as he got into economic and social justice and complaining about the war in Vietnam, the so-called liberal press walked away from him. The NAACP didn't want to know, and so you're sort of like, and his big point was if you don't have economic or social justice, you really don't have equality. And so flash forward, 30, 40 years later, where I remember when rap was getting popular. It was a thing in the 70s, right, late 70s, but then it started really getting steam in the 80s. And by the late 80s, McDonald's was using it to sell hamburgers, and so, you can have the United Colors of Benetton working at Starbucks, but without economic and social justice, there really isn't any. And so I kind of see that, and I didn't really think about it until you said this, but it's like it's very true because the gay community, they buy things and they do things too, so they want those dollars. Is that kind of what you've been seeing a lot?
It is, and I think it's a difficult process to really navigate because without some of the support and publicity that the commodification of different causes creates, it's hard to bring awareness to those issues, and it's hard to get traction and to evoke the kinds of social justice and economic restabilization that any marginalized group really is looking for and benefits from. Everybody benefits when there's economic stabilization, except for the people who are invested in there being destabilization or disparity, right?
Sure, absolutely.
And so it can be, I think it's a little bit of a chicken and egg issue because when you start bringing awareness to topics, there will always be a section of the population who see it as an opportunity to further their own agenda. and it might not always be the same agenda that the group has to offer. And so I think a lot of people in groups that are climbing and clawing for power and equality find themselves feeling a little bit torn on how do we align with this. And one of the things that I thought was really interesting, and especially in anticipation of this conversation with you, I've really been looking around at some of the retailers that I go to and the different products to see kind of what's been cooking in the zeitgeist and the commercial situation. And I won't name the retailer,
sure,
but it's one I go to every day, and they're very well known, very popular, and they're known as a more affluent grocery chain, especially in the LA area. And I walked in and I noticed that there were 4 different brands of coffee. Now, there are probably 25 brands of coffee on the shelf that's allocated to coffee in this store. But there were 4 different brands that had rainbow flag artwork on the cover of the packaging for the coffee. And they were supporting it as their rainbow blend or their pride blend. And I thought, well, it's interesting. You know, even the coffee that we drink now, are they in support of helping to break the shackles of oppression and stigma? Maybe. Are they opportunistic? Maybe. Are they both? Maybe. I don't know. And I think that's where there's a lot of confusion for consumers and for people who are trying to understand what's going on socially, because we don't know what a lot of the companies' motives are or who sits at the helm of the decision-making tables and what their motivations are. And so I think that it can be really hard sometimes to trust the motivation of what we see in a capitalistic culture.
See, and you make a good point, because you said a second ago that it's obviously it's in light years. I mean, people don't care about gay marriage anymore. My mom's Roman Catholic. She used to have a big problem with my cousin who's gay, and not that she didn't love him or anything like that. She just wished he wasn't gay, And now she doesn't really give a crap. She's like, well, he's happy, right? And like, he came to my brother's wedding a few years back with his boyfriend. They've been together longer than most couples I know, and so it's kind of like, all right, well,
most heteronormative couples.
Excuse me.
Most heteronormative couples,
Yeah. I mean, they've been together like I think 13, 14 years, and he's about my age, and longer than most heterosexual couples that I know, and not. He went through his wild years or whatever, but he's not like some serial monogamous every 3 months kind of thing, and neither is his boyfriend. So I'm like, all right, well, that seems comparatively healthy. I got friends who've been married 2, 3, 4 times before the age of 45, and you're like, all right, But the point that you were making about destigmatizing, but then we get to this where it becomes trivial, right? And then it gets to the well, it's like, because this isn't exactly Stonewall anymore, right? Like now you got rainbow flags. When my cousin came out in the 70s, we were like 14, and it wasn't like we had Will and Grace or anything.
Right.
All he had was like Stonewall and Harvey Milk, and that was it. And you come out to an Arab dad and a Brazilian mom, and it was uncomfortable. So to this day, kudos for having that kind of courage. But it gets to that point there, like, for example, with Pete Buttigieg, who I'm not a fan of as a candidate, not because he's gay, but it becomes that where it's trivial, where like, would it be great to have a gay president? I'm like, well, we said that in 2008. Wouldn't it be great to have a black president? And it was a brand. There wasn't any substance to the Obama presidency. I don't want to go down that road with you because I know that's not really your wheelhouse. But what ended up happening is that he became president, and then the next year he won the Ad Age Marketer of the Year award over Apple and Zappos. Right? And you're kind of going, huh? Yeah, Zappos. That's a name you haven't heard in a while. And so, that's kind of like, to speak to that point. You walk in, and this market that shall go unnamed now has rainbow flags everywhere, and it's all kumbaya, and isn't this great? But then I kind of think we haven't gone far enough, because then you get these people. I still have friends that are younger than me, under 40, that still think like this. They'll go, well, I hate it when it's in my face, and you're sort of going, I'm like, well, what else do they want? You're going, whoa, like, I don't know, maybe
representation. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe more equality.
Place
You know what I mean?
Human.
Yeah. So I mean, do you hear a lot of that?
I live in a little bit of a bubble in LA because we're a little bit more progressive, I think, than a lot of other parts of the country in terms of, especially that issue, but really a lot of issues around sexuality. But what I will say is that where there's resistance, there's resistance. And people, there's a couple of points I want to come back to of what you just said, but speaking to the idea of resistance, and humans ultimately don't like a lot of ambiguity. And we seem to be under this notion that power is a finite resource. And that is always such a phenomenon to me, because there's as much power as we create as humans. And some countries do this really well. Our country right now is really struggling with how to allocate power and resources. And we seem to be operating from a position of scarcity very frequently when it comes to how do we survive? How do we make do? And what I mean by scarcity in that way is that it seems like people don't feel like they are seen. They don't feel like they're heard on every side of the political spectrum right now. And my assessment is that when people feel like they're not seen, validated, heard, taken seriously, it evokes in them a very visceral and human set of reactions around, oh no, I might psychologically or biologically die. I might be at risk. And it evokes such terror that people go into a lot of power grabbing. Mm-hmm. And so I think when we see that kind of resistance anywhere, it's really about, if you get center stage, am I going to be compromised? Will my ability to feel safe be compromised? And so I think people get really dismissive, and they get really quick to try to take up as much real estate as they can in terms of any sort of platform that's available. And that's, I think, part of what we're seeing, is that there is a jump toward people taking up space in a platform that's meant to support and advocate and destigmatize, but it's actually creating the opposite effect for some people, where they're starting to feel more objectified, and in a less clinical or academic term, people are starting to tokenize each other, right? You mentioned Obama in, 2008, when Obama was elected, and people were saying, we need a black president, it's time. And so it's sort of commodified and tokenized this idea of what it meant to be black and why that would be of value. Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying it was or was not of value to have a person of color in the office, but when we start speaking about it in that way, we're really dehumanizing the experience that comes with that label, identity.
Yeah, no, and that's so
experience.
Yeah,
there's a lot of different terms that we could use to describe that.
Well, that's so well said, because that we did that again in 2016. With Hillary Clinton running, and we need a woman president. Well, I'd rather have Jill Stein. She's a woman, and she's like really smarty pants, and she's a doctor, and she's got some good ideas, and she's not a corporatist person, warmonger, fracker, pro-banking person. So, I mean, it's like like we need an X. It's identity politics. I mean, kind of back to the Pete Buttigieg thing. One of the reasons why I kind of resent him is to my friends out here in Austin, which is pretty blue. I love him. We need a gay president. I'm like, well, he's the gay Obama. Okay, not a lot of accomplishment, coming in, writing an identity, and people thinking it would be so neat to have a gay president. Well, okay, it doesn't mean he's going to be more wise or more intelligent. I got a lot of gay friends, and some of them are assholes, and not because of anything, then because they're assholes. They'd be an asshole straight person. It doesn't make you more wise or intelligent or sensitive. I got gay friends that go over the top, and they come off like an Italian in New Jersey with a Camaro. Hey, yo, come here. Hey, that's not good. That's not good. That's not good. Guys don't like that either. You're like, so there's no, like they're doing this again this year with Kamala Harris. So she's a woman and she's black. I'm like, yeah, and I'm from California, and she was the worst attorney general we had ever had in California. Her Republican opponent ran to the left of her. And now that record is starting to come out, and I'm like, I would love to have a woman. But it's like saying I would like to have another straight white male. I don't necessarily want the identity. I want the qualification.
Right. And I think a lot of people can articulate that that's what they want consciously. But what the piece that sometimes gets missed is that as creatures who are relational by nature, we often do look to relate to things that are familiar. or the things that feel, how do I want to say this, that give us more of an emotional sense and an emotional tie and visceral reaction than what the front part of our brain would actually like to have happen. Because the part of our brain that is reacting and saying, well, it would be great to have a gay president, or have a woman president, or a black president, or a fill in the blank, whatever identity politics president, what we're really saying, and what's really happening, in my opinion, is there's a part of our brain that says something doesn't fit right now, and that ambiguity is scary, and I don't know what the answer is, but this could feel good. Now, that's true for people on every side of the political spectrum. We fill in the blanks when we don't have an answer, and we often shoot from the hip in the sense that we go with whatever our most reptilian brain initially has a positive experience toward. Now, sometimes that can be a good thing, and sometimes it can be a little bit myopic, but it's hard to know until that other part of our brain, the frontal cortex, and the part of our brain that takes the longest to come online, actually kicks in and says, oh, wow, these policies actually do align with what I think would be great, and here's why, or, oh, wow, they don't. Okay, maybe I should rethink this candidate, or whatever we're talking, whether it's politics or CEO or evaluating someone's merits.
Well, okay.
Any role.
Well, in your practice, and I don't want to be specific because I know that's not kosher, but in your practice, you obviously see all walks of life for the most part, different people. I'm sure with you have gay clients. How do they feel about the last several years? Are they feeling more comfortable, more safe, more accepted, less? I mean, because I was living in LA, at least since the 90s, I didn't have any friends that were like homophobic or freaked out about that. And then
I think it's a little bit dangerous to say gay people think this or gay people think that, because it really doesn't represent the diversity of thought within any kind of group. And with the patients that I work with and people in my social circles, I think there are big variations in how safe people feel and how safe they even feel to talk about how safe they feel, really. There's sort of two conversations happening right now. So, I think there's a lot of diversity in that reaction and the way people want to have the conversation.
Yeah, no, well, that makes sense. I mean, but, I guess on a general level, are they, do you find that most of the people you see are a little bit more relaxed, at ease? I know LA is LA and New York is New York, and even Austin's Austin. but because my cousins never had a issue with that. I know some guys when I was working in film, late 90s, early 2000s, they were just like, screw it, this is who I am, fuck you guys. And I admire that. But I also know some folks that were, they kind of look at themselves as the perennial victim. There's always someone that's trying to harsh their buzz or whatever. And so I didn't know if lately, people were feeling more optimistic, or like they can have a picture of them and their spouse in their cubicle, and no one's going to freak out and do anything stupid or say anything stupid.
Yeah. So I'm licensed in California, Illinois, and Florida, and I work with people remotely, depending on which state I'm actually in. And I will say that there seems to be, again, a lot of diversity in terms of how people are reacting, whether they identify as having membership in the LGBTQ community or not. And some people are feeling much safer and like they can talk about whatever is their identification, their orientation, and then a lot of people feel like those aren't appropriate topics to be discussing at work or in politics, and so they feel less safe to discuss it regardless of what their membership card might say.
Well, see, okay, I'm sorry.
I just think it's difficult to sort of speak ubiquitously for a whole group of people's experience. See,
and this is the thing that I run into occasionally, and lately with the under 40 set, which still kind of blows my mind. when the few people I know that'll say, well, what more do they want? I'm tired of it being in my face. And you mentioned earlier the certainty, and they feel they're at risk, which is probably invoking that reaction. But the other part of me kind of goes, well, don't you have any empathy? I mean, and it's not like they got to talk about sex. I mean, I don't know any, I really don't know any gay folks that talk about their sex life in detail. I don't either. It's really nobody's business. So it's like, but if they're married to a guy or a woman, and they're having a problem in that relationship, and they're talking about that issue, and it happens to be that it's the same sex spouse. I don't get where the offense comes from. I don't get where people get so wigged. They're throwing it in my face. I'm like, really? Are they talking about cock and balls? What are they doing that's so offensive to you?
Well, even if they are, is your relationship to your sexuality so fragile that you can't handle someone else's?
100%.
That's the conversation that I think we could be having culturally, is why do people feel so threatened by speaking about sexuality in general or sex in general?
Right.
I think that if more people spoke about it without shame and, within the construct of feeling safe and expressive around it, then we would be seeing a lot less sexual aggression. We would be seeing a lot less homophobia, internalized and externalized. We would be seeing a lot less duplicitous sexual behavior. We would be seeing a lot less affairs and compulsive sexual behavior. We would be seeing a lot less going on like what just happened with, what's his name, Jeffrey Epstein, being busted for human trafficking. I mean, when people cannot talk about sex, their sexual interests, desires, and behaviors go underground, and there becomes an increase in risk associated with it, which is a component of eroticized rage, right? When we add the taboo to our sexual behavior. And so it creates a different charge in the brain, and people can become a little bit more, and sometimes a lot more, what's the word I'm looking for? Undercover in their sexual behavior. And so regardless of orientation, I mean, I think people have, as a human species, we have an imperative here to start bringing sexuality back into what can be spoken about without shame. Now, I'm not saying you talk about it at your kid's birthday party. Obviously, we have to be mindful of developmental
We played naked hide and go seek, and it was awesome. Oh, Junior, hi. How are you? Let's roll some movies. Hey, see my phone? Oh, see, there's a thong, boy.
Yeah. But and again, I think there are appropriate boundaries and things that people can put in place to really assess for what is the right or the safe environment for different groups of friends that they're with or family members. And I think that's part of the conversation. But certainly we have a lot of shame around sex in this country, and that shows up regardless of who you are sexual with. People have a lot of shame when they're sexual with themselves.
Well, you make a point. Like I used to do a lot of stand-up comedy when I was living in L.A., and it's funny, for the listeners out there, L.A. is not necessarily the bastion of progressive thought. I know a lot of religious folks out there.
It's really not.
It really isn't. I played in bands out there too. Trust me. It's like the stuff I would hear out there. I go, dude, I don't hear that in the South. What are you talking about? But truly, the joke I used to make some of my friends, that kind of educated folks, right? But they're hung up on their the religious side of it, and they'd get, it's a choice to sin against God. I'm like, did you tell your parents? Because I don't think that. I don't think it's a choice. I think you're born away. It's like. Yeah, I've got my peccadillos that I remember since I was 4 or 5 years old, forming my little roles of what men and women do. And I was like, all right, that looks fun. And for whatever reason, I didn't have puberty yet. It wasn't like some, I still had the little, swimming pool nub of a 5-year-old penis. But for some reason, playing cowboys and Indians seemed like a good idea to me be the Indian, so that way I could tie up my friend's sister. And that just sounded fun. I don't know why. It just sounded fun. And then as I got older, it took on a whole another meaning. Suddenly detective shows took on a whole, whoa, I like that detective show. That's the one where the Snoopy girl reporter gets caught. Yum. And so I started empathizing with, okay, this, it wasn't until I was probably 23, 24 that I was dating somebody older, and she kind of gave me permission. Because I thought it was weird. I thought it was a pervert, And she kind of gave me permission. I was 23 and she was 35. And she was like, have you ever tried? And I'm thinking, I'm trying to be cool. Have I ever tried? I've been thinking about this since I was 5, but, and she was really cool. And so I just kind of, okay, there's ways to do this, but you don't get that, what am I trying to say? You don't get that kind of permission every day. And so some of my friends that, it's a choice. I'm like, it's a choice. I don't think it's a choice. And then I have had a couple of my friends go, well, if my kid turned out gay, I would, kick him out of the house. And specifically, there's one friend of mine who, like your store, will go nameless. He used to say that during football. We'd be watching football. Kid was like 6. And sometimes it would come up, and I'm like, and I'd say that. I was going, oof, man, did you miss a meeting? Because I could tell. The kid was, finally here we are, 8, 10 years later, he's in high school. And when I was home in L.A. for the holidays last winter, we got lunch and hung out. And I was like, how's everything? He was like, well, I'm cool. So works good and da-da-da-da. And so-and-so's gay. And I was like, whoa. Oh, so he does know. and I go, oh, did you guys talk about this? He goes, no, we haven't. He's going to tell me eventually. And I'm working to create a culture, an environment where he's cool with it. But I know. And I don't think he knows that he knows. He might know. And maybe he's afraid to tell us, but he's going to tell us any year now. I was like, okay, so you cool with it? He's like, yeah, I've accepted it. I made my peace with it. He's super religious. I made my peace with it. It's either lose my son or, hang on to my ideals. And I'm just, and he goes, I can work both. I can love my son and all that, and that's a refreshing take.
Yeah. Sounds like he's really had a lot of growth and time to sort of calibrate and recognize the beauty and sometimes grief that comes with having to make decisions about big things like faith and family, and they don't always align. We have a choice as humans to accept that we can't always get what we want, but if we really value the relationships that we have an opportunity to try and reconcile with sometimes our belief systems or our idea with how the world was supposed to work or what we thought was true. And, if we're self-examining and open, usually we can let in a lot more love and empathy. But when there's a lack of empathy, really to me, that's a signal that there's a lot of fear happening for someone, because as human beings, we're hardwired for that connection and we're hardwired for empathy. That's why when you ever notice, like if you're speaking to someone and they start crying, you get a little teary sometimes. Yeah, good. You're not a psychopath, Abe. And that's
really
important.
Well. I've got some friends that would beg to differ. At least put me in the sociopathic range, but okay.
I haven't evaluated you, so there's that. But
that could be fun. Now you're tempting me.
People who really have a hard time feeling empathy don't generally tear up when they see someone else getting teary, right? Because that part of their brain is wired a little bit differently, or they're really in a state of fight, flight, or freeze, and so they can't access that part of the information that their brain is giving them. So when we think about that, like, people really have to be in some big fear. And so when I encounter anybody who has that kind of a writing response or a fear response or a division response, I wonder, what does it mean to you if? What does it mean to you if this is true? If your child is gay? If your friend is gay? If you are gay? Or if you're Catholic? If you're not Catholic? What do all of those things mean? And what I think we fail to remember as humans is that we assign so much meaning, and much of it is arbitrary, but it's based on how we're socialized to see ourselves and the world. And that's why it's so powerful. And we create whole narratives in our minds about what is going on. And the objective reality is something that we may never actually know, because we can only see it through the lens of our subjective humanness.
Yeah, okay, and not to get too far down the road off the identity theft, because it's not just LGBTQ like we mentioned earlier; it's different groups, right? But the one thing that kind of I got asked the other day. I made some joke about Trump on Facebook the other day, and which is not unusual because I don't like Obama either. If anyone wants to beat me up, if they've listened to this show, they know I hate everybody. So it's called The Bitter Truth, not Big Wet Kiss. So go fuck yourselves. But the lack of this woman asked me. She goes, what has President Trump done that has ruined your life, or what did Obama do that ruined your life? I said, nothing. I'm self-employed, and nothing. They've not done anything to ruin me personally. I mean, taxes, maybe. I don't like where my money goes. I don't like wars. So I rattle off this list of things. I'm like, when I see the average, 50% of working people making under $30,000 a year with 2 or 3 jobs, that angers me because I can empathize with trying and having roadblocks put up against your own bad decisions. It's not this person made a bad decision. It's just their job went away. Anderson, Indiana went away. Scranton, Pennsylvania went away. That angers me. Watching kids die in corporate dirt wars, that angers me. They're not my kids. And I don't have any of my friends' kids except for a couple that are in the military. And even then, when they took those kind of the equivalent of SAT scores to get into the military, figured out, okay, you're a rocket scientist, kid. You're not an Air Force mechanic. And so they put them into these linguistic translator. You're going to learn Arabic for 2 years so that you can spy on people, kind of thing. So then they're never going to get shot. They're never going to get sent to Afghanistan on the front lines, right? But I can empathize with someone who lost a child. I've had lost a lot of friends, and I've been to the funerals where their parents are crying and wailing biblically, right? So that angers me. It didn't affect my personal life. No, my nephew's 15. He's not going to go into the Army anytime soon. And if he did, he'd probably end up as a rocket scientist. I have no idea. But so that angers. I don't have to experience it to be angry about it. I empathize with the loss. It's like an empathy of loss. It's like that's why we like sports, right? Because we've lost things, and oh my God, I hope those guys win because I like them. And whoa, that would be really a drag if they lost because losing sucks. And excuse me, I watched the World Cup final the other day. I was glad America won, but I was like, oh God dang it would have been nice for the Netherlands to squeak it out, but they didn't. And so I kind of empathize with those girls. I'm like, oh God damn it, that's just that sucks to lose. But hey, you got this far, right? Mm-hmm. And when people lack that, I don't think they're psychotic, but it's just to kind of speak to your point. It blows my mind that they get so mean about it. You know what I mean? Well, they shouldn't have brought their kids to the border, or last year when all that stuff was happening in Gaza, well, they shouldn't have walked to the fence. It's like you're sniping 6-year-olds, right? It's they shouldn't have, Saudi Arabia. Well, they shouldn't have been dissidents. They chopped off 37 heads a few weeks back, and you're like, well, they shouldn't have done that. Like, really? That's your big response? It's such a lack of compassion. Yeah. And so I kind of wonder where does that safety come from? Or where is the safety in a lack of compassion, I guess, is ultimately my question in all of that tirade is, where does that safety come from in a lack of compassion, right?
Well, it's a good question. And I think that there isn't a lot of safety when there's a lack of compassion, and that's the problem, right? And there's actually a chapter in my book that talks about what you're describing, and the label for it would be victim blaming, right? And people are failing to recognize their own role in the cultural aggression that persists internationally. And I think a big part of it is because people feel vindicated and they feel justified in their actions because of their belief systems. And again, they're activated around fear and feeling like their group, whomever their group might be, if it's the people we live around locally in our community, or the people who align with our gender, or the people who align with our religious beliefs, or the people who align with our political beliefs. We belong to lots of different groups every day. And we are psychologically wired to try to protect those groups and ensure their survival. So the thing that's mind-boggling to me as a psychologist and armchair anthropologist, not a licensed anthropologist, but studying human behavior for as long as I have, one of the things that's so mind-boggling is we have these giant sophisticated brains that have evolved so much, and yet simultaneously we are so primitive in the way that we just are in our neurobiology. And so there's a lot of unconscious group mentality and group think that takes over, and people think that they're doing the right thing because it aligns with their value system, and they feel completely justified. And so they might be really good, kind people if you interact with them one-to-one, but then threaten their community, which somebody approaching their country line asking for resources might feel like a threat, right? It's, in my opinion, myopic, because these lines that we've drawn in the sand are pretty arbitrary. Again, they've taken on meaning, but we are seeing each other as different species as opposed to seeing each other with different kinds of food, different ways of interacting, but still people at the very core. And so I think that it really has evoked a more primitive reptilian brain response for a lot of people that, if you've ever watched Lord of the Flies, it's pretty evident, right?
Right.
We all start to get a little bit dicey when we think our survival is at risk.
Well, and then you mentioned earlier, like these things manifest. It's like a zit, right? You can put as much makeup on as you want, but it's going to still pop out, right? And so, like you mentioned earlier, the duplicitous sexual behavior, and obviously there's a big category. But you mentioned what's his face, Trump's buddy, the trafficking guy,
Jeffrey Epstein.
Yeah. So at what point? Obviously, we objectify things. We objectify groups of people to feel safe. We objectify sex to feel. We objectify women. They objectify men to feel safe. And so, but at what point? Because you said we have even this point that we have these big brains. But at what point do we kind of look in the mirror and realize this isn't good? Like I'm trafficking girls. This isn't good. This isn't. There's not too many of my friends I could discuss this with unless they're my customers or whatever.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? It's like at what point? Because a lot of these people, like I'll see, like I subscribe to friendlyatheist.com, which is kind of hilarious, and they'll always have these articles. So and so anti-LGBTQ minister guy got busted in a love affair using the church's money to put the guy up in a hotel, or they got a kid ring, and not to conflate pedophilia with an adult homosexual relationship. I'm just simply saying it was bust these guys at the height of hypocrisy. And I'm like, okay, you're educated. You went to school. You read a few books. I mean, you read the fucking Bible. The Bible's loaded with duplicitous sexual behavior, David and Bathsheba. And so at what point do people just check out and just let the id go, even though they've got the resources to know better?
So there are a lot of ways to answer that question, Abe, and I think it would be a disservice to any of them to leave it as is. So what I'll say is that there's a lot of long stories here, but I'm going to try to make the Cliff Notes for you.
Sure.
Some people have a psychological makeup that really prohibits empathy from being something that they really can engage in a human, viscerally felt way. They might understand empathy as a concept, but their brain is wired in such a way that it's not accessible to them. And those are the people that tend to be more at the head of some of those child trafficking rings. And sometimes even their brain fuses together the element of law breaking and risk and getting away with something that goes with engaging in child trafficking or any kind of human trafficking, because it's illegal. It's something that is socially conferred upon that we don't do, right? But when people do things that are taboo in that way, oftentimes their brain is hardwired for more excitement around it. So for some people, they don't have empathy, and those are different psychological conditions. And then there are some people who do have empathy, but those roots in the brain that communicate empathy to the parts of the brain that communicate behavior and action and thought actually get hijacked because of the dopamine that comes from the experience. So stop the behaviors for a while, people's brains can recalibrate, and they can start to feel the empathy around that. With that comes a lot of shame, typically. And part of what compels them further and further into that behavior is avoiding the shame. And so the cognitive dissonance that can occur when somebody is saying, this thing over here is bad, and then they're over here doing the same thing, right? They're trying to protect themselves against whatever feelings might come up if they were to accept the reality that they, in fact, enjoy, or are doing this thing that they say is so bad or believe is bad. So there's that. And the other thing to think about is that people often will say one thing and do another because they have ulterior motives toward power, toward grandiosity, toward control. And so that can be a wildly compelling motivational factor when we're talking about some of these kinds of exploits, especially within communities where there's a lot of prohibition against something.
Right.
Because when you get away with it, you have a lot of power.
Right. Well, and then that's kind of, just kind of a little to tag on that. It's why the person who gets caught is always crying, but he wasn't crying she wasn't crying during the thing. It's really just crying because you're caught and it's embarrassing. But then, see this, but a lot of these folks, when they quote unquote get caught, it's not in behavior that's harmful. I mean, if you get caught in a homosexual affair with another grown up, okay, so fine. It's not like you're harming anybody. You guys were consensual. It's your thing. But I think the baked in the brain chatter that we get stuck with is when folks who know better, like we were saying a second ago, are continually hiding and bearing the truth and then trying to so aggressively persecute the people that they are behaving just like, right? And for me, it's just like I've always, especially since I hit around 40, I started making more open jokes, about sex and my sex life, because it just seemed like everyone does it. Everyone masturbates. Sorry. Like when you're in junior high, it's horrific if someone says, you masturbate, you jack off. No, I don't, man. I'm just like, yeah, I do. Usually around 5:30 in the morning, get it out of my way and go on about my day. And it clears the pipes. My head is clear. I get in the shower, and feel great. Feel like $100. And so, but, and I'll make jokes about my tastes or whatever. It's like, because when you try to hide it, it just gives it that kind of power.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? It just gives it that power. Like people can have something, quote, on you, unquote. And obviously there's some people with some issues that are not user friendly. But my rule of thumb, and maybe this is too trivial, and you can correct me, if you're over 18 and you're with somebody and you're consenting and you're all cool and they're over 18, you're adults making decisions. Where's the harm in that? Now that negates the entire other half of stuff that you deal with on a daily basis, I'm sure.
Well, yes, but let's just take a pause and address that for a minute. Now, I appreciate what you're saying, that if you are at the age of consent, different states are different around what that age looks like for different kinds of contextual ideas.
Sure.
But if you're at the age of consent and you're participating with someone else who is also of the age of consent and everybody's consenting, there's been affirmative consent, there's conversation around it, it doesn't matter what you're doing as long as there's consent, communication, collaboration, right? But we're not talking about people necessarily looking out for protecting or harming others. When people are so resistant or defensive, it's not necessarily that they think they're harming others with their sexual behavior. In the example that you gave of somebody who has a secret sexual relationship with someone who's of the same gender, it really is about image management, impression management, and maybe the people that they're trying to protect are their partners, their children, their other family members, sometimes their employees, sometimes their community at a church or a temple. People often feel obliged to protect others from the truth, even though they might not think the behavior is bad because of whatever are the social contracts of that community or that family or, again, that group. And so, again, it really comes back to how do people identify and then what group memberships do they hold on to? And it's amazing, and we all do this. No one human being is unique in this way or exempt, but we all have lots of different memberships to groups that are going on all the time, and they make up how we see ourselves individually. How we see ourselves individually contributes back in a feedback loop to how we participate in those groups, and if you think about a group as like a moving jellyfish, right? It's constantly changing shape. We all contribute back to that. And so it's really hard to have a conversation around any of this if we don't really start to examine how do we show up as humans who are interconnected, and our groups are interconnected. We can't just set down one part of us and say this exists over here in a vacuum. Everything is related. All of our memberships.
So kind of tagging back to the original point of our chat, do you see, and I'll just stick with this one group, but do you see the commodification of the LGBTQ community as positive for them?
And
I know it's a big them. That's a big it's a big them, right? Like, because not everybody's the same, and some people resent it. I remember my cousin made a joke a few years back because his boyfriend wants to get married, and he was like, "One of the cool things about being gay was I didn't have to be in the army and I didn't have to get married." So now all these assholes want to go in the army and they want to get married. He's like, "Dude, that's the cool part about being gay. The army won't take you, and you don't have to get married." And anyway.
I mean, is the commodification of any marginalized group a good thing for the group? And I think it really depends on who you ask and what the long-term implications are of that commodification. I think some people would say, hey, even bad press is good press. And I'm not comparing bad publicity to commodification and exploitation of a group. Sure. But rather what I'm saying is if it helps people start a conversation, then maybe that's a positive thing. But where I think it's dangerous to say it's always good is if there's blowback. And unfortunately, we can't control for blowback, even if there are good intentions with someone's motivation. And so I think the lemonade out of all of this, or lemon martini if you're me on a Friday night, would be to think about, even if somebody is co-opting the story of a group. Now, I don't advocate for that, and I think that it can do tremendous individual and collective damage to the psyche of any marginalized group. Right. And I think that that's something that people can speak out against, and that becomes a part of the dialogue that we have as a group of humans trying to figure out what it means to be continuously in evolution. And that's what's happening. We're adjusting, right. We're ebbing and flowing, we're changing as a group, and I think a big part of that requires people to have hard conversations and requires everyone to take a step back and take ownership of how they might be contributing to a constructive conversation or a destructive conversation. What are their trigger points? Where are they getting hot? Where are they getting angry? That's an opportunity. Anger is a communicative force, right? Let's pay attention to anger instead of trying to snuff it out and say it doesn't exist, because it exists on every side of a disagreement, regardless of what the disagreement is. And it needs to, because it helps educate us on how to have safer relationships with each other. And that's all we're really trying to do, is just live and thrive concurrently.
Well, how do you see, and you know, not to objectify, but how do you see us compared to, say, Europe with some of these mores? I mean, I know a lot of parts of Europe are still pretty stodgy, but it just seems like a lot more, especially up, you know, in you know, like the Nordic areas like Norway and Denmark and the Netherlands and stuff. It just seems like they're much more accepting, of alternative lifestyles and like a different point of view. I mean, maybe I'm romanticizing from what I've read and seen, you know. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
I think that it's a little bit of a mixed bag, because, as you said, there's some diversity around conservatism versus more progressive ideas around sex in general. You know, what you can see on TV in Europe is very different than what you see on TV here. And I think that in some countries in Europe, that does create a little bit more ease and less shame around some conversations around sex, some behaviors around sex, and people feel more integrated in that way. And then, you know, there's also a lot of other kinds of I will say social limitations and stop checks around sexuality. And, you know, there certainly is a lot of duplicitous behavior that happens in Europe as well. So
Sure.
I don't live there. I don't practice there. So I can't really speak as intimately to the culture, but I would say, you know, everybody can do better in terms of having these conversations?
Well, we got a few minutes. I mean, but so like, for example, the reason I ask that is because before 76, 77, before 1976 or 77, before the moral majority and Jerry Falwell took over the Republican Party was largely from Lincoln to about maybe through Nixon even, a largely progressive group. I mean, Reagan, as governor of California, legalized abortion in California as the governor. Bob Dole, who ran against Clinton in 96 for president, was one of at the forefront of civil rights legislation. He was at the forefront of women's right to reproductive choice, right? And their attitude at that time was very libertarian. It's like, well, we're not going to make any laws to legislate against it. You make the law, and they can do it if they want to do it, because that's not our place. The GOP at that time was that's not our place. We don't legislate in the bedroom. We don't legislate that. And so for a guy like Ronald Reagan, who became Ronald Reagan, to make abortion legal in California before Roe v. Wade, right? So that slow, steady progression just, like you said, it seems like we're de-evolving. It doesn't seem like we're evolving. I mean, we're doing all this stuff in the 60s. It's not like we were perfect in the 60s, 70s. But it just seems like we're going the other way, whereas these draconian abortion laws, for example, it just seems like we got so much crap baked in the brain that like the certainty and the lack of that certainty equals this great risk. And it seems like people are willing to kill people for it. And I guess that's always been the way, right?
Yeah. I mean, it really has. When we look back on human behavior from the start of what we have documented, people are willing to die for what they think is right. And if we boil it down to our most primitive experiences, again, it's usually around power and safety and making sure that their group, their tribe, their people are the ones who have access to resources. And so I think right now we are living in a world that can be really challenging. And technology has been such a gift in so many ways. And I think it's also created several platforms for comparison that didn't exist before. And also it's created more difficulties with real intimate connection and more psychological buffers. Now, that can sometimes feel weird for people to hear about, because they'll say things like, well, now I know people in every part of the world through social media. And Abe, that's how you and I met, is through social media. And so
absolutely, 100%.
There are a lot of really amazing ways that social media can connect people. But what I think is happening is it's actually stunting us in our ability to connect one-on-one with people and experience the benefit of the neurobiological, the neurobiological experience of going deeper with people in person. When we connect over social media or technology, there's a buffer. Our neurobiology is not interacted with in the same way. So our nervous system is not interacted with in the same way. And when we're connecting in person with people, it's a very different experience. And I think that people right now are so deprived of that because we're so technology focused and driven that they get flooded more easily when they actually experience any kind of emotions. And we don't have the same kind of emotional regulation skills that we once did before for many reasons, but in part because technology has created this instant gratification culture. And so we don't actually pay attention to ourselves as much as we used to. And so I think people are romanticizing this world where individually they may have felt differently. Culturally and collectively, we felt differently. And when I say felt, I mean emotionally, but really like viscerally. Things felt safer because we were less stimulated, not necessarily because our ideology was different or better, right?
Right.
And so I think there's just a lot of conflated ideas running around right now in the world. And when people are vying for power, they'll grab onto whatever gives them traction. And right now there's an idea that if we migrate back to this time and place, this Polaroid picture of, I don't even know what America that was. I don't know if it ever existed. I wasn't born then, so I can't say it did or it didn't. But what I will say is that we tend to romanticize things that are either in the past or the future. And so, sitting with this idea that things are going to be better when we get a different president or when my political party is in control versus the one that is or is not right now. when my company makes more money, I'll be happy and contented when. There's a lot of that fantastical thinking happening right now. And I think it just scares people. And so we don't know how to react. We're not talking to each other. And that creates more of that kind of collective bonding, if you will, based on nothing more than, honestly, our neurobiological dysregulation and a need to feel safe. And so we'll ascribe meaning where there isn't and affix stars to wagons that we feel have the most potential to keep the wheels on.
Well, as that I'll leave that as the last major thought. That was pretty heavy stuff. So hey, listen. In parting, is there anything you want to kind of share with the listener? And are you working on another book, or is it still "Fuck You, Fuck Me"?
Still "Fuck You, Fuck Me." It's an ongoing.
Love that title. I just had to say it. Okay.
An ongoing process.
Okay. So, do you have an idea of when you're wrapping that up, or is that still kind of ongoing?
It's a little bit nebulous, but it looks like it should hit the shelves probably late 2020, which is exciting and right around the corner. So the book is titled "Fuck You, Fuck Me: Sex, Money, and Anger in Relationships in Modern Society." And in it, I'm addressing a lot of the things that we were talking about and really helping people understand the underlying eroticized rage and monetized rage that governs a lot of the behaviors that we've been describing in terms of objectifying big groups of people or interpersonally in our more intimate relationships, and compels a lot of the behavior that we've described. But some of the other exciting things that are going on, we're taking our show, so thank you for plugging the show, Behind Closed Doors with Dr. Kate and Lauren. We were on KABC Talk Radio, and for season 3 that's coming up this fall, we're actually going to a YouTube live format. So it'll be really exciting, and people can engage with us live and ask questions, and we'll continue to talk about all different kinds of psychological issues, trauma-related issues, sex and relationship-related issues, and really kind of bridge together the interwoven nature that is being a human in this modern world.
That's phenomenal. So is that going to be in addition to KABC, or you're leaving KABC?
We've left KABC. So if anyone wants to check out our previous episodes, they can go to our website, triunetherapy.com. It's TRIUNE therapy.com. And they're all housed there, season 1 and season 2. Good for you. And then season 3 will hit YouTube probably late August, early September. So it's very exciting.
Good for you. And I know we're kind of coming down to the wire, but was that a decision because of editorial reasons, or what kind of led to that decision?
A couple of reasons. As wonderful as it was to be a part of the KABC family, I think for me, I wanted something that was a little bit more interactive and allows Lauren and I to be out in the world and more visible and a little less isolated. So we want to take the format to a video format so that we can invite people into that world and have a more meaningful conversation. Awesome.
Well, that's phenomenal. Well, good for you. I've listened to a couple of episodes, and you guys are onto something. And I was always kind of concerned about KABC being KABC, and if you guys are really able to do what you want to do. And so it just seems like you're going to have a lot more freedom on the YouTube platform. I think that's going to be a lot of fun.
Thank you. Yeah, we have a lot of creative liberties, and I'm excited about this season. We're going to talk about some really cool things.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, folks, my guest has been Dr. Kate Balestrieri, and again, co-founder of Triune Therapy Group, host of Behind Closed Doors with Dr. Kate and Lauren, now going to be on YouTube Live. And that's kind of wrapping it up. And, again, we're on patreon.com/The Bitter Truth, where you can show up and be a member. And, of course, you can always listen for free as well. We just appreciate the membership. And if this stuff makes you uncomfortable, it's supposed to. Sleep tight.